Aloha! And I come to you from the island of Oahu, Hawaii. And you might have noticed that I have been recording a series of interviews with prominent people, up-and-comers in entrepreneurship and science and engineering, and arts and technology. But this time, this is just me. I will be speaking for an hour, impromptu. I do not have an outline. I do not have a script. I don't have any notes at all. It's just me. And you might be asking, why am I doing this? The answer is because I am afraid of it. How should I put it? All right. So I'm an author and a published author. This is the second in a trilogy of nonfiction books I've written, Life in the Market Ecosystem. And I have to find a way to market my books. Sometimes people want to interview me, to talk about my ideas, and for a long time I've been reluctant to do that. I'm very self-conscious about my dialect. I don't have a normal dialect for someone who grew up in Hawaii. And people tell me I have a speech impediment. People both from Hawaii and from outside of Hawaii. So I want to get myself accustomed to speaking in a specific way. And I don't just mean public speaking. I have given speeches to crowds before. Back in 2010 on tax day, I gave a speech at a Tea Party rally, and that was rather well received. However, I'm self-conscious not so much about speaking in front of large groups of people. That does make me nervous, but I do it anyway. What gets me really skittish is speaking in such a manner where my voice will be electronically recorded, and where I hear my voice played back later. And I hear myself not enunciating words properly. Sometimes I overpronounce some words, or I say the word in a funny way, pronounce it in a funny way. I put emphasis on the syllable no other American would. So I want to make recordings of myself speaking, and then so I can play it back later on. For a while, I tried to record myself reading a book out loud, but it's not the same. If I'm reading a book out loud and recording that, I can be very careful. The words right in front of me, and I can read very slowly. But all the rules of that don't apply when I'm speaking in a back and forth conversation with someone over the internet, such as when someone's hosting a program on Blog Talk Radio, and then I call in. I've done that several times. And of course, I speak impromptu. I'm not following a script in front of me. I don't have that book as my security blanket. And so when I'm speaking impromptu, all of the old tics come back. And I want to find a way to address that. And some people have suggested Toastmasters to me. If you want to be in Toastmasters, that's a good thing. But I want to try things my way. I want to make a recording of myself in a normal, informal, back and forth conversation with someone. Well, perhaps some people would say my interviews have been somewhat formal, but to me it was all fun. Hence, I'm just talking like this. You know, you have radio hosts, people on the radio who talk for 3 hours a day, and I say they do it pretty well. I want to see if I can just speak like this for 1 hour without any interruptions, without any commercial breaks. I understand that radio program hosts have notes, at least when they start on topic for the day. But of course, after a while, especially when they're speaking to callers, they're just speaking off the top of their heads. And that's what I wanted to try over here. So I want to talk about shyness. ever since I was a little boy, people have called me shy. And I don't actually think that applies to me. There are specific contexts where I can be described as shy. For example, sometimes I would see someone I admired, and I would be afraid of going up to that person and talking to that person because I was afraid of my idol disappointing me. I guess you could call that a form of shyness. Now, I don't have that mindset so much anymore. The idea is that I want to be famous, at least famous for insofar as I want to promote my books. And when I'm famous, it's inevitable that I'm going to network with people, and I'm going to come across other famous people, including people I admire. In fact, people I admire recommending my books would be great. And I'm very honored that this book has received a recommendation from Jonathan Hoenig. You might have seen him on the Fox News channel. He's on the program Cashing In. He's one of the commentators. Very good commentator. He talks about investing. He owns Capitalist Pig. He's the principal there. And it also has endorsements from the philosophy professor Andrew Bernstein. He's the author of the Capitalist Manifesto and the Wiley College historian Alexander Marriott. So I'm very grateful to all of you guys. Thank you very much. And all of them were famous long before I was. So if I let my fear of talking to my idols overwhelm me, I wouldn't have gotten blurbs of endorsement from them. So in that respect, I can be shy. Sometimes I want to ask someone out, and then I remember all the times I've been shot down in the past, and that can make me reluctant. In that respect, you can say I'm shy. But generally, as a general orientation, I don't see myself as shy. It's not, if you ask me how to describe myself, that word doesn't come up. And yet I've been described that way by many teachers. Actually, the term is introvert, which is not the same as shyness. Shyness is a form of fear and anxiety where you're shy. What makes you shy is that you want to socialize with other people. You really want to go out and talk to other people and get their approval, but you're stopped by that because you're afraid they will disapprove of you and reject you. That's shyness. Shyness is an extroverted trait. I guess you could say that insofar as I'm afraid of asking someone out and getting shot down, that's being afraid of disapproval, that's afraid of rejection. So that's a form of shyness. But generally, in school, I would mind my own business, drawing my monster pictures, and I liked being alone. And often the teachers would try to manipulate me into talking to my classmates, many of whom very brazenly disrespected me, said I was a loser, said I was ugly, told me I was fat and therefore I don't deserve to live. So, I'm not a fan of fat shaming at all. People trying to fat shame me, my relatives fat shaming me, my classmates fat shaming me, that never did me any good at all. But basically, I liked being left alone to do my art, and that was called shyness. Actually, it's being an introvert. An introvert is someone who generally an introvert feels relaxed, more relaxed when alone. Introverts aren't always alone all the time. Some introverts are surrounded by people and they talk to people all day long. The difference is that an extrovert is someone who feels really anxious when alone for a long period of time. If an extrovert's alone for a long period of time, that person feels really bored. That person gets restless. For instance, I gotta go out and talk to someone, and then I'll feel happy and energized and relaxed. Introverts can also go out and talk to people. They usually do. Very few introverts are complete recluses or hermits. But they usually prefer a small group of friends. And when they're around other people and talking, it can make them feel happy, but it also drains them. They feel emotionally drained, and they think, when I go home and I'm alone all by myself in my bed, that's when I recharge. That's when I'll feel relaxed. So that's the difference. Extroverts feel relaxed when around other people, especially in environments that are pretty loud, that have lots of sensory stimulation, whereas introverts feel more relaxed when alone. Also, you might have noticed that on social media, it's finally become cool and hip to be an introvert. Never thought I would see the day. That's because of a book by Susan Cain. She's an attorney. She wrote a book called Quiet, The Power of Introverts in a World That Can't Stop Talking. Actually, I'm an introvert and I can't stop talking. So what does that make me? But that's the book that I would say made being an introvert finally respectable. And finally, people were finally okay with your being an introvert. Well, not really. They still look down on you, but not so brazenly anymore. The stigma is being reduced. And I know some people are getting sort of defensive about it. They say, I'm really sick of you introverts shoving your introvertedness in my face. And I want to say to them, well, now you know how I feel. All for decades of my life, more than one decade, you guys are shoving your extroversion in my face, telling me how inferior I am for not being an extrovert. And that comes back down to people saying I'm shy. So teachers told me I was too shy. And that for me, that didn't compute, because if you bring up an intellectual topic, such as the philosopher Adam Smith, I'll just go on and on and on and on and on. But if people want to make small talk with me, they ask me how am I doing when they really don't know who I am and don't care, I'm not that interested. It's not my idea of a good time. If the way I see it, if you're going to talk, you have to have something worth saying. You have to have something worth remembering. If you ask someone a question, that person's answer is worth remembering. If you ask someone, how is he doing, and you know beforehand you're not going to remember what that person says, I don't see a point in it. Well, cognitively understand it's part of a social ritual. The idea is that first you start with small talk, and if the person makes small talk with you, it's supposed to build a specific level of trust. So, okay, this person has crossed one threshold, and then we go on to the next level, and we have deeper conversation after we've gotten the small talk out of the way. The idea is that people don't indulge in your small talk in the first place. Well, then I guess the conclusion people draw is if you don't indulge in their small talk, then they won't trust you to talk about deeper topics either. But for me, and for many of us other introverts, all that small talk is a big chore. Okay, we want to go into the big ideas right away. And I don't see what's so bad about that. So cognitively, I do understand people wanting to put a lot of emphasis on small talk. But emotionally, I'm not there. Psychologically, I'm not there. I don't empathize with that. I don't relate to it. So that's one reason why I was called shy very often. And also, yeah, I'm not a party guy. I mean, there are times I went to dance clubs and I danced very horribly. It was mostly just me jumping up and down. That's my idea of dancing. And it was fine. But I mean, as you can imagine, it was very tiring. It's not something I can do regularly. And besides, I think it's rather expensive to go to a dance club. You know, and the prices of drinks are outrageous. And I'm not a big drinker either. I don't drink alcohol at all. Not for any religious reasons. Just that I grew up in a household that didn't drink alcohol. I don't even disapprove of drinking alcohol that's how little my household, my family, my parents have thought about it. We think so little about alcohol, we don't even disapprove of it. It's just not something we thought about. So, going to a dance club and spending lots of money on an alcoholic beverage, it doesn't have much meaning for me. If you want to do that, that's your prerogative. But Susan Cain, in her book Quiet, she cites some psychological studies, and I think this is very plausible. She says that there's everything else being equal, you find a trend where physical sensitivity correlates with emotional sensitivity. That is, the more sensitive you are to physical stimulation, loud noises, touch, bright lights, the more emotionally sensitive you will be. So, so if it doesn't take much to get a reaction, if loud noises easily arouse you, if your skin easily gets itchy, probably you'll also become a person who reacts emotionally rather easily too. And why does it matter? Because introversion also correlates with emotional sensitivity and physical sensitivity. The idea is that if you go to a dance club and you hear all the loud music, the sensory stimuli will overwhelm you much more easily than it will an extrovert. And that's why if you're an introvert, going to a crowded place that's really loud, it'll make you feel tired, you'll feel sensory overload, and you'll want to go home much earlier than the extrovert. Extroverts, in general, this is not always the case, but in general, extroverts are less physically sensitive, which means that if you want to get a rise out of them, if you want to arouse them, you need to apply more sensory stimulation. Maybe that means they need more intense sex too. But Susan Cain didn't talk about that particular topic. But generally, she said that extroverts need more physical stimulation to receive the same level of arousal that an introvert would receive from much lower levels of physical stimulation. And correspondingly, it doesn't take as much to get an emotional rise of an introvert as it does an extrovert. Extroverts, she says, are less emotionally sensitive. It doesn't mean less emotional, it just means need a larger dosage of stimulation for an extrovert to get the same amount of emotional response or physical response as you would from an introvert, who receives much lower levels of stimulation. So you could say, for instance, I can just read a book, and it's a very engrossing book. I will get very emotionally aroused by it, and like when I was reading Atlas Shrugged, I couldn't just sit quietly and read Atlas Shrugged. I would yell at the book. When I read the book, I would just yell at it. I would say, God damn that James Taggart and that Wesley Mouch, I hate them so much. By the way, Wesley Mouch is pronounced Mouch, not Mooch. You can read that in the book, 100 Voices. That's about Iron Man. So I'm not shy. You might notice that by now. I am an introvert. And for the past 10 years, some people were still calling me shy, and that would get me really irritated because usually over the past 10 years, people who called me shy were huge loud mouths. They would talk on and on and on about nothing. Okay, when I talk about something for a long amount of time, I think I'm talking about something of substance. But I mean people who called me shy would talk on and on about nothing just because they couldn't stand silence. Silence was just intolerable for them. You couldn't have a moment of silent meditation around these guys, and gals too. And they were often very in your face. I mean, literally, they would put their faces close to yours, and you could smell their breath. It was very hot breath too. And they would hug you without your permission. Like, I would just start talking to them, and they would just hug me without warning. And it's nice you want to show affection, but really, you're invading my personal space. And it bothered me for a long time when these people called me shy, because it seems as though they're using that as a synonym for weak and timid and unassertive. And after all I've done, I mean, I go out there, I write articles, I write books, put myself out there, I say my controversial opinions, which are subjected to ridicule by critics. No one likes that. But I put myself out there to be ridiculed by people. And after all that, you call me mousy and shy? No, you didn't. But they called me shy anyway. But then I thought about it, and I thought, well, consider the source. If it was a really mousy person who always minded his or her own business who called me shy, I would have to take that into consideration. But if it's people who are always in your face, invading your personal space, and talking for hours about nothing, just because they can't stand silence, if those are the people who call me shy, why should I care? Do I want them to? Are those people I want respecting me and calling me non-shy anyway? The more I thought about it, the more I had to admit, no. So, in your face people who can't stand silence, go ahead and call me shy. I think when posterity looks back and judges us, judges things we've done, judges whether we've asserted ourselves, whether we stood up for what was important to us, I don't think the word shy will be used to describe me. And even if extroverts in the future historian extroverts look back on me for some reason and call me shy, well, that's their problem, not mine. So I guess people calling me shy, it still bothers me, but I don't take it as personally now as I did before. I know a lot of people say this funny thing. They say, I don't care what other people think about me. Well, the truth is, I do care what other people think about me. If you say you don't care what other people think about you, well, I'm not going to contest that. I can't read your mind. But the fact of the matter is, I do care what other people think about me. It does emotionally affect me, and I'm not ashamed of that. So I do care what other people think about me, but I don't care if you disapprove that I care what other people think about me. How you like that? And there's a very simple reason why I care what other people think about me. That's the consequence of natural selection. Because human beings are primates, and we have evolved from a set of organisms that lives in groups. The chimpanzees live in groups. The most unrealistic, and gorillas too, all the great apes do. The most unrealistic thing about King Kong is not that he's giant, it's that he's alone. In real life, primates live in social groupings, usually among their relatives. And human hunter-gatherers were the same way. And basically, if a human hunter-gatherer strayed away from the clan, that was very dangerous. I mean, much less likely for that person to survive and then propagate his genes. So someone who offended the clan and was banished was less likely to propagate his genes. So let's say, for argument's sake, that a hunter-gatherer undergoes some sort of mutation, was born with some mutation that makes him emotionally not care what other people think about him. and he acquires a bad reputation. He follows his own natural course. Probably he'll get booted out of the clan. He won't reproduce, and he'll die. And he won't propagate the genes that made him not care what other people thought. By contrast, what about all people not in the clan who do care what other people think about them? Who do care what other members of the clan think about them? They go with the flow and fuss about their reputations. And in the process, they maintain a stellar reputation among everyone else, and they survive. And they propagate the genes, and in so doing, whatever genes cause them to have an emotional predisposition toward caring what other people think gets passed on to their children, and also they condition them to care what other people think. So caring what other people think, that is default for human beings. They're born with an emotional predisposition to care what other people think, and that's conditioned into them. Now you might be thinking, why am I saying this as an individualist who often says controversial things that make people dislike me? Well, I'm telling you this because that's where the evidence, that evidence is on the side of that. So what I say is, I do care what other people think, and it does. When people reject me, that of course emotionally affects me. The issue is my priorities. Living the way I want peaceably, speaking the truth as I discern it, standing up for the truth as I discern it. That's more important than always maintaining a positive reputation. That's more important than other people liking me or approving of me. So I do care what other people think about me, and I do want them to like me. Everything else being equal, it's better that people like me than dislike me. But if I have to weigh that against speaking the truth and living my life according to my judgment, I put my own judgment above all of that. So the way I see it, I live my life as I want, and other people disapprove of that. And to me, that's just a trade-off. That's just the cost of living my life as I want. And although in a perfect world I can live as I want and have everyone else like me, I can't have all of that. I have to make a choice. So the trade-off is I live as I want as an individualist, and other people dislike me. And I just think, well, that's the cost of living how I want. And if I had to make the choice all over again, I'd still choose living the life as I want, and speaking my mind. So that's how I reconcile those things. I do care what other people think about me, and everything else being equal, I want them to like me. But they can't be prioritized above living by my own judgment, speaking the truth, and all those things. That's why I'm still an individualist. And I admit that I do care what other people think about me. And I don't see anything wrong with that. So sometimes I talk about this, and well-meaning people say to me, oh, you should read Richard Feynman's book. Well, you care what other people think. It's right there in the title. And Richard Feynman says some interesting things. I admire his work in physics, but sorry, Dr. Feynman, human nature is to care what other people think about you. Even when you're a loner like me, and an introvert, and a recluse. You know, that's one thing I like about this new information technology. You know, with present information technology, you can be both famous and reclusive at the same time. That is unimaginable to a hunter-gatherer. When you're a hunter-gatherer, you're dealing with people inside of your clan, your in-group. There is no being impersonal. If you're a hunter-gatherer, you can be impersonal toward people, members of other clans, people from outside your clan. But the clan itself usually wouldn't go above 250 people in population. So when you're dealing with people inside of your hunter-gatherer clan, all interaction with people in your society is personal. Everyone knows what everyone else is doing. So unless you separate yourself from your clan, which, as I said earlier, is pretty dangerous, you can't really be a recluse and a hunter-gatherer. But we're not hunter-gatherers anymore. We live in a much more technological society where you can be much more independent, where you can live, where households are much more independent, where the family unit is not the whole clan, but usually some pair bond. In a heterosexual couple, it's a man and a woman and their children. Nowadays, we also can have pair bonds of gay couples can get together and adopt children. But basically, either way, family unit is much smaller. You have a smaller household. It's more individualized, and you can be a single adult living alone. So you can be much more independent, and you can still live in society, interact with people, and cooperate with them and survive. But you have much more privacy now than you would as a hunter-gatherer. And what makes this possible is our present information technology, such as me speaking to you right now through Google Hangouts. And I really like that you can be both a recluse and very famous at the same time. Let's see if I can find it here. I have a whole stack of books here. Oh, never mind that. But I bought from the library. I bought the biography of Bill Watterson. You might know him as the author of the Calvin and Hobbes strip. He's very famous. His name is well known. His art is well known. But if you want to track him down and do an interview, that's not easy at all. He's very hard to track down. He's both famous and reclusive. Once Greg Evans, the man who draws cartoon land, came to Oahu at the library and gave a presentation, and I was there. He said that Gary Larson, who draws The Far Side, and Bill Watterson are the Howard Hugheses of comic strips. Greg Evans said that every year there's a convention of newspaper cartoonists, and every year they invite Bill Larson and Gary Larson, and they never show up. See, another one like that was J.D. Salinger. Catcher in the Rye is well known, but J. Salinger didn't do that many interviews. And of course, there's the man that Greg Evans mentioned, Howard Hughes. He was a billionaire, and for the last 11 years of his life, he was confined to a hotel room, and he did business over the telephone. Now, I don't plan on being a complete shut-in and just staying in the same apartment and never leaving it. I do plan on leaving the house and not be a shut-in. But I like the idea of having a lot of time alone to myself and thinking my thoughts, and having control of when I do and don't interact with other people. And I think a lot of information technology affords us that privilege today. It's something that people from 1,000 years ago didn't have, and I'm very grateful for that. Let's see. I have some stack of books here. I thought if I don't know what to talk about, I can start talking about them. Let's see. This one I bought from the library. It's Marissa Meyer. They say Meyer. It's spelled Meyer, but we pronounce it Meyer. Marissa Meyer in the Fight to Save Yahoo. This was expanded by Nicholas Carlson. This was an expansion of Nicholas Carlson's very long article about Marissa Meyer in the internet-based periodical Business Insider, owned by Henry Blodgett. And that was a really long article. And Nicholas Carlson said there's a funny story behind that. You know, I guess if you want to know the details of the story, you'll have to read this book. But yeah, I think Marissa Mayer is very interesting. She was one of the first employees of Google, and she helped write the search algorithm that Google uses. Her name is on the patent for it. This reminds me. So I went to patent.google.com, looked at these patents of all these famous people, and I was really intrigued. I looked through the patents, and when I read them, I couldn't really understand all the jargon, but there was something rather romantic and exciting about seeing all these patents. I mean, you can look at Thomas Edison's patents, you can look at Jamie Lee Curtis's patent, the actress. Penn Teller has a patent. It's a self-pleasuring device they patented. I'm not kidding. But anyway, so I looked up Marissa Mayer's patent. That looks interesting, and I put it on Facebook, and I got this funny reaction. Some people who are open source computer programmers saw that, and they said, "Is that a software patent?" And they got very indignant. There's some people, they just blow up in your face if the topic of software patents comes up. I mean, they think it's so evil. I mean, on the one hand, if you bring up Al Qaeda, they'll say, "Yeah, Al Qaeda's bad." But if you bring up software patents to those same people, then they say, "Now that's the real evil destroying the world." Well, for your information, I'm actually not sorry about the existence of software patents. And I'm not sorry Marissa Mayer's name is on a software patent. And I'm not sorry Google has software patents. Anyway, this book is about whether Marissa Mayer can save Yahoo. So far, I wish I could say I was impressed, but I'm not. She made headlines because she sent out this memo saying that if you work at Yahoo, you can't work from home anymore. You have to go to the office and work there. And many female engineers at Yahoo were very upset about that because they're young mothers. They've recently given birth, and when they could work from home, they could take care of their babies and still work for Yahoo. And they said that now the option has been taken away from them. Now, whether or not Marissa Mayer's decision will have a positive effect on the bottom line, I don't know. But I'm rooting for Marissa Mayer, so I hope things pick up. Let's see. Here's another one. Marco Polo, The Journey That Changed the World by John Mann. I think his name is pretty easy to remember. John Mann, Mr. Mann. Marco Polo is one of my favorite topics because, I mean, you know, back in the late 1990s, you saw all these business books trumpeting something they said was new called globalization. They said, you know, free trade has opened up trade between different cultures like never before. And I welcome that, but international trade has been going on for millennia. Trade between separate cultures has been going on for millennia. And Marco Polo was a part of this back in the Middle Ages. Europeans traded with East Asia and with the Islamic societies through the Silk Road, which is actually not one road. It's actually a whole network of different routes through Central Asia and Asia Minor. And many historians think Marco Polo traveled those, and there's a bit of controversy. We have published Marco Polo wrote a book called Travels of Marco Polo, but the version we have is not exactly the same as what he wrote. It's a copy of a copy of a copy of a copy. And if you've ever played the game Telephone, you know how every time someone does a new rendition, every new version leaves a risk of distorting things a bit. So some historians say that if you go to the library and borrow Travels of Marco Polo, what you have, is probably quite different from what the real Marco Polo wrote. But anyway, the controversy with Marco Polo is that some historians go as far as saying they think he never went to China and he never met Kublai Khan. They think he made it all up because they think that some of the details he gives in his account sound rather fishy or inaccurate. But lately, some authors have been, such as this one, have been defending Marco Polo. They say, well, there are also many things that he describes in his accounts, and that other people didn't know about at the time, and which they don't think was added, in by later authors. We think it was in the original version. And the only way that Marco Polo could have known about those details in China or the Mongol Empire, the only way he could have known about those things was if he actually did go to China and did meet Kublai Khan. So I think Marco Polo is an interesting figure. He's a good figure of international business, the original international businessman. He was also a tax collector, though. So he's not a purely laissez-faire entrepreneur. He also collected taxes on behalf of Kublai Khan. So he's also a tax bureaucrat, someone with whom entrepreneurs usually don't have the fondest feelings for. And there's a myth I have to dispel. There's a myth that says that Marco Polo went to China and he saw noodles, and no Italian ever saw noodles before, and Marco Polo brought noodles back to Italy, and that's how pasta was invented. That's how spaghetti was invented. That's a myth. Yeah, even before Marco Polo went to China, other travelers had already brought noodles back from Asia, and noodles were well already known in Italy at the time, I believe. I could be mistaken about that, but that's what I think. That's how I think the situation is. So here's another controversial one: defending beef, the case for sustainable meat production. And basically, this is by Nicolette Hahn Niman. And lately, a lot of people have been saying that raising cattle and beef is bad for the environment. They say that cattle are a huge contributor to greenhouse gas emissions through their methane. And they say, well, cows fart too much, and that puts methane in the air, which is warming the earth. Well, it's true that cow farts contribute to that, but mostly it's their burping. It's mostly exhaling, but most of all it's their burping. But I think some people think it's funnier to say methane comes from cow farts. But anyway, they also talk about how they say, well, so much rainforest is cleared away to make grazing land. See, and had a rainforest not been cleared away, the rainforest could have had a mitigating effect on anthropogenic climate change. But Nicolette Hahn Niman in this book has rebuttals to those arguments. She says that, first of all, when rainforest is cleared away in South America, slashed and burned for farming purposes, it's not actually to raise cattle. Most of it is to raise soybeans. I have to admit to you, I like soy. I like soy products. I like soy sauce. But anyway, she says this rainforest being cleared away for agricultural purposes. They're often wrongfully blaming cattle raising when that's not related. And she has other arguments here, but I only got through the first chapter so far. So does she pull it off? Does she make a convincing argument? The verdict is still out. I have to read more of this. And this is an autobiography of Bob Kane, the co-creator of Batman. Batman was also co-created by an artist named Bill Finger, but he often doesn't have as much credit. Some people accuse Bob Kane of purposely hogging all the credit, not giving enough credit to Bill Finger. But anyway, this is the autobiography by Bob Kane. Not surprisingly, he describes himself as a loner. And he talks about the details of Batman's creation and how, like Superman, Batman came out of the Depression era. It was very depressing, and that's why people needed heroes. This one's called "I Live in the Future and Here's How It Works" by Nick Bilton. He's a business reporter, and this book is another futurology sort of book. Nick Bilton says he's going to predict the next few trends, in business and economics, new consumer trends, how lifestyles will change, and this is supposed to help me make decisions on how I'm going to run my business, what markets I'm going to cater to, what demographics will be like in the future. The same author wrote a history of Twitter. He wrote about the 4 co-founders of Twitter, Jack Dorsey, Biz Stone, Evan Williams, and the 4th one is named Noah. His name is Noah. I think it's Noah. I will look it up for you later if you want. And they all started out as friends, but starting Twitter, first few years of Twitter were very contentious, and there's a lot of bad blood among the 4 co-founders of Twitter now, at least according to Mr. Bilton. So you might have noticed in all my videos I have this poster behind me. There's a story behind that too, of course. This is actually the original version of this is a mural by an artist named Rudolph Zallinger, and it's for the Smithsonian Museum, I believe. I know it's for a museum. And the idea behind this is that it's sort of a march through time. The farther right you go, the farther back in time it is. And it shows the sorts of organisms that lived in this particular era. On the far right here, you can't see, it's the Devonian period. That was the age of amphibians. And as you go farther right, it comes closer to the present. This here is a Dimetrodon. It's an ancestor to mammals. It's not a dinosaur. For a long time, scientists thought the dorsal fin on its back helped regulate temperature, and that we still think the Dimetrodon, and this one here is an Edaphosaurus, which is related to Dimetrodon. But Dimetrodon is a meat eater. Edaphosaurus is an herbivore. Now scientists are more skeptical of the idea that the dorsal fin regulated temperature, maintained a regular body temperature for the reptiles, but they still do think that they're closely related to our ancestors, the first mammals descended from creatures similar to them. And as we go farther right, this is a Triassic period, the first period of dinosaurs. Then we go to the Jurassic, that's an allosaur. And then over here is an Apatosaurus. I prefer the name Brontosaurus still. It means thunder lizard. And in many ways, this poster is scientifically outdated. For example, back in the late 19th century or early 20th century, they looked at the Apatosaurus and they thought it's so big, we don't think it can support itself unless it was in water, submerged in water. And they thought the water helped support its body. Actually, nowadays they say they don't think sauropods such as the Apatosaurus went in water at all. So this part is inaccurate. Another aspect about this is that See, here's another sauropod here. Several dinosaurs in this picture are shown dragging their tails. That's what modern lizards do. They drag their tails. But now scientists say dinosaurs don't do that. They didn't do that. The tail was always lifted above ground. It helped the dinosaur balance. And they're hunchbacked, and they looked a lot like modern birds. You know how birds, when they walk, every time they take a step, the neck and head bob forward and backward. They, they think Tyrannosaurus Rex did that too. Lots of dinosaurs did that. Birds, that's a trait birds got from dinosaurs. And you notice how birds' tails don't touch the ground. I mean, even when they're walking on the ground, birds' tails doesn't touch the ground. It's always lifted above ground. Well, that's how dinosaur tails work. So in many ways, this painting is outdated, but I mean, they're going by the best data they had at the time, and I think it's a good part of history. And I think that just because scientists of the past made mistakes, it doesn't take away from what they did. Scientists will naturally make mistakes, but they go by the data they have, the best data they have available. The ethical scientists, the best scientists, I mean, they make mistakes. And, they present data and they get some things right. And we learn from them, and scientists come later, subsequent in time, build on that, the work of the predecessors. It's because of the scientific method where we discover where our predecessors were wrong in the past, where we ourselves were wrong in the past, and we say, okay, well, that particular detail is incorrect, but now we have more data, we incorporate that into our current body of knowledge, and we correct the mistakes. And that's okay. It's okay. It's good. It's good to be wrong sometimes, as long as you confront new data and correct the errors and build on that. That's the never-ending process. All right. Let's see. Here's another one. Hard line. Life and death on the U.S.-Mexico border. See, this is where I have to part ways with many conservatives. They're very down on Mexican immigrants. You say, oh, so many people cross the border from Mexico into the U.S. and they don't get a visa first. But I really can't disprove of that. The Carnegie Institution did a study and they found out that on average it takes 5 years. If you're a Mexican, it will take you an average 5 years to get a work visa or a family visa to come to the United States. So if you're poor and starving and you want to find a job that pays you much more money, I mean, can you really afford to wait 5 years? Do you really want to go through all that bureaucratic red tape? If not, that's why so many people are crossing the border. And another problem is that there's a quota, there's a cap on the number of visas that the federal government can issue to each country every year. There's a cap limiting the number of visas awarded to Mexicans each year to come to the United States. It's a very low number. Number is much lower than the people applying. See, and I don't think that it's just to have that cap. And often conservatives say, well, if all of these Mexicans come to the United States and they are a burden on our taxpayer public coffers. They're draining all the money out of our welfare state. And the way I see it, the welfare state is unsustainable as it is. Fact of the matter is, the welfare state would be unsustainable if there was no immigration at all. So if it's true that immigrants are contributing to a drain on our public coffers, that only means we have to face reality sooner rather than later. We have to face reality that these systems are unsustainable. We have to face that further. We have to face that in a shorter amount of time from the present than we otherwise would. But the day of reckoning would come either way. And also, I don't think that this whole welfare burden argument justifies having a cap on the number of visas issued each year to Mexicans, because there's so many other institutions in our society that drain public coffers, where licensing does limit the number of institutions operating, but there isn't a cap on the number of licenses issued each year. For instance, you have to get a business, you have to get a license to operate a business legally, but there isn't a cap on the number of business licenses issued each year. There isn't a cap on the number of farms that can operate, new farms that can open each year, even though, because of farm subsidies, farms are draining on public coffers. Same thing goes for museums like the Smithsonian Institution. Same thing goes for banks. Bank bailouts cause banks to be a drain on public coffers, but there is no cap on the number of new banks that can open each year. And I think if someone suggested putting a cap on the number of new banks or new farms that can open each year, many conservatives and libertarians would rightfully say, no, that's tyrannical. It's tyrannical. It's not right to say just because these institutions are a drain on public coffers that we should add more government impositions by putting a quota, a cap on the number of institutions allowed to operate each year. If the problem is the drain on public coffers, maybe we should just not have so many taxpayer subsidies. Maybe we should have all this welfare. And to me, the same argument applies to immigration. If you don't like immigrants getting welfare money, maybe you should reconsider the whole institution of welfare, rather than say, well, Native born Americans are more deserving of these welfare services than these immigrants are, so it's okay to have a cap on the number of visas issued each year. And that's the way I see it. I know people don't agree with that, not even my fellow conservatives or libertarians. There's even some anti-immigration objectivists, and we lock horns quite a bit. But I'm an unmitigated supporter of open immigration. I side with the illegals. I think they have a true entrepreneurial spirit, and if some of them do come to the United States to go on welfare, if there are such people, I would rather blame the politicians who instituted those welfare systems in the first place. That makes sense to me. And I don't see how being born on one side of the border instead of the other entitles. I don't see how, if I was born in the United States on U.S. soil, so I don't see how that makes me more entitled to all of these welfare services or more entitled to education than this Mexican is, just because that person was born on the wrong side of the border and I was born on the right side of the border. It's another way of saying so-and-so was born on the right side of the tracks. So that's my stand on it. Let's see what else we have here. Abominable science. This is about cryptozoology. That's a euphemism for fake zoology. This book purports to debunk the Loch Ness Monster and Bigfoot and the abominable snowman. And when I was 9 years old, I was the hugest believer in the paranormal. Now I'm not a believer anymore. Actually, that has a lot to do with Ayn Rand. That's another story for another time. I could have talked about it this time, but it didn't occur to me to bring that up. Maybe if I do another impromptu session of just me talking for an hour, I can tell you that story. But this book is pretty interesting, and what I like about this book is its tone. I mean, a lot of books that try to debunk the paranormal have a very condescending tone, and they say, "Oh, if you believe in UFOs, you're just dumb." I like James Randi, but often he uses that condescending tone, and it was turned on, especially when I was a believer and tried to read James Randi's Flim Flam. His condescending tone was a huge turnoff. What I like about this book is that two authors, well, first of the two authors says that he too, like me, he doesn't know me personally, but he too was a huge childhood believer in paranormal, and his wanting to catch the Loch Ness monster actually got him interested in zoology in the first place. And he explains how the more he studied these creatures, the legends, the more he had to admit to himself that the evidence is against their existence. But he's not trying to be condescending against people who believe these things. He's explaining how, he can relate to people who want to believe in those things because he also wanted to believe in these creatures, and he did at one time. It's just that upon trying the evidence, he cannot honestly remain a believer. And I think that's a good position to take. So, I guess I'm ending a bit early. I have 3 more minutes. I could go on for 3 more minutes, but I think I won't. I think I made my point. I think I've spoken long enough. So if you've sat through this whole thing and listened to me, I thank you for tolerating me. And I don't think I came across as shy, now did I? And I'm going to conduct more interviews this week, not with me, but with other people. Not my imaginary friends, but real people. And I hope you might be interested in them. So thank you very much.